County Board of County Commissioners now in session in this
Your mic.
workshop.
I don't think your mic's on.
It is now. For this public workshop with the State Fire Marshal's Office. We do appreciate all of you being here today and look at it as an opportunity for us to learn some of the things that maybe we can do to help better support all of our volunteer fire departments in the county and the response and the safety they provide to our citizens. Before we begin, the first order of business is going to be public comments. I have two here. One's in the room, one is not. So we'll begin with you, Miss Debbie, since you're in the room. Miss Debbie Jordan, if you would please come forward, state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Director Hallis, Assistant Director Rice, Miss Susan, and forgive me that I can't retain all of the names at once, but it's so grateful to have your presence
Miss
here.
Debbie.
Turn this way.
There.
Sorry, my apologies. Sound okay.
Yep.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come to our small community and share with us any insight that you can provide on how we can have the most efficient, the most effective, the safest, most reliable, dependable fire department system set up so that we can protect our community. I know it took you a lot of time to get here, so my comments will be short. They are those of gratitude and the honor to have you in our presence.
Thank you. Michael, you ready for, see if Mr. Barry's still on the line?
All right, Mr. Barry, I am going to, and if you go ahead and unmute Mr. Barry, if you state your name for the record, you can address the board, sir. Good afternoon.
Yes, can you, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for finally getting able to say something here. What I'd like to learn out of this workshop, if possible, is what is the relationship between the State Fire Marshal's Office and the County Volunteer Fire Departments? Is there any jurisdictional or methodology for setting up these volunteer fire departments other than training requirements and certification? Does the State Fire Marshal have guidelines for counties on these setups for these services? Do they address corporate structure, ownership of assets, i.e. property, buildings paid with public funds? Or is the county contracting for these services with private organizations using public funds with no accountability? Assets being accounted for, including rolling stock, equipment, liquid assets, cash and CDs. Are there guidelines that address the fiscal responsibility of these volunteer fire departments? Or is it set up in a manner in which the counties can get this support and help? As you can see, some of our issues center around a number of these points. Do you perform any type of fiscal meaning monetary responsibility, compliance standards, compliance performance type of audits on some type of basis, timely basis? Are these all strictly county functions? And with that, I'll turn it back over. I'm just basically trying to learn what the state's relationship is with regards to the county and these volunteer fire departments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Okay.
That's it.
Yes, sir. That's it for public comments. Up next is the presentation from the State Fire Marshal's Office.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Chairman Jones, fellow commissioners, and Mr. Marone, County Coordinator, thank you for all your guidance and invitation, hospitality. Mr. Schuler, where's Ms. Schuler? Thank you for giving us a little framework for how you conduct your county Board of County Commissioner meetings as well as your workshops. And I want to thank you in particular for allowing us to expand this to a workshop, because I know at first it was contemplated maybe a BCC meeting, and we might have only been limited to 15 or 20 minutes. So this is much better, so we can go into more details. And I'm Julius Hallis. I'm here representing Jimmy Petronas, our Chief Financial Officer. And I'm sure you know this as elected officials, but actually the CFO in Florida, after the constitutional amendment that changed the governor and the cabinet from 7 positions to 4 positions about 2 decades ago, that incorporated a number of functions under the Chief Financial Officer, one of which is still the elected state fire marshal, and also has Department of Insurance and other things in that portfolio. So we're the Division of State Fire Marshal, for which I have the honor of serving as the director for the last 13 years, has been under the Chief Financial Officer, who is the elected state fire marshal. Obviously, like many of you have to deal with public works, with planning and zoning, with many, many different hats and everything, and so does the CFO. So I get the privilege to be in the director, and I bring to the table 48 years in the fire service. I started my career with Sarasota after serving as a firefighter, EMT, paramedic, lieutenant, captain, all the way up through the ranks and everything, and became fire chief at the young age of 38 with 18 years of service. After a few years, we consolidated with Sarasota County. So the entire unincorporated area merged in with the city of Sarasota. And so that made us almost 500 fire personnel with 100 volunteers. And I bring that up not to brag or anything about the size, but it was quite a lot of responsibility. And it included 100 volunteers throughout the community, out in East County, near Mayaca State Park, and all those different areas. So there was a lot of rural areas east of I-75. And so we had some of the same dynamics that you have. You have coastal communities that are much more populated than some of your unincorporated northern parts of the county, which are more rural and forestry in nature. So that brings a lot of diversity to the community, also brings a different set of challenges. So we're going to share today. I brought a lot of my staff to help me, and I'd like to introduce them at this time. Joanne Rice is our assistant director, and she'll be sharing part of the program. Her tenure came up through Gainesville Fire Rescue, and so she's got a full over 30-year career. I've got Melissa Denver-Sur, our special projects coordinator, online, and she helps us with a lot of our infrastructure grants, some of which have been awarded by the House and the Senate and approved by the governor right here in this county. I have Mark Harper, our bureau chief of the Florida State Fire College, which is, as a bureau chief, he's over the Fire Standards and Training Bureau and the Florida State Fire College. And one of the things unique about that is that we have, again, that diversity. Some of the questions that came up in comments already about different challenges and everything. As you can imagine, we have big, robust metropolitan departments that we help coordinate with, Jacksonville, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, etc. And then we have many, many rural departments. And so just several years ago, we were able to start getting some grants and everything that we're going to talk more about during this program. Because of the leadership of the CFO and State Fire Marshal, was able to work with the House and the Senate and get some financing for different types of grants. This green bucket, you might wonder, what is that green bucket sitting there for? It looks like it came from Lowe's or Home Depot. But actually, that green bucket is represents one of our grants. And we brought several of these buckets over. Mr. Schuler, you appreciate that, because we want every fire engine in the county and all the incorporated areas in Franklin County to have one of these green buckets. In that is $250 worth of hoses, adapters, cleaning materials and everything. So when a firefighter goes into a contaminated fire and they come out, they immediately have to get some of those carcinogens off of their safety equipment, everything. So we're going to talk more about these grants later. But this particular grant was $1 million from the House and the Senate that was 100% funded with no local match. So all we had to do is sign everybody up, get some basic fundamental geographic information from them and demographics, and we have disseminated nearly 5,000 of these, they're called on-scene post-fire decontamination kits. And you have them throughout the community, and we're going to make sure if you have any new engines or updated ones that we'll make sure they're on there. Also, we have, let's go on to the rest of the staff. John Gatlin is our Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Fire Prevention. And I forgot to mention that Chief Harper did a long multi-decade career in DeLand Fire Rescue. Chief Gatlin did multi-decadal career at Tallahassee Fire Department. And Chief Gatlin is in charge of our Bureau of Fire Prevention. And so we're going to talk both about training, standards, safety, and we're also going to talk about fire prevention responsibilities. And then we also have Susan Schell. And Susan Schell has been working for many years statewide in training and safety through the Bureau of Fire Standards and Training. And she helps us take care of safety inspections. Anytime a fire department is awarded one of these grants from the Florida House and the Florida Senate, through the proviso language, we have the responsibility to make sure they have a baseline safety inspection to help shore that department up. We want every fire department that's going to get a grant to be that much safer, and in doing that, we want to be sure they have fundamental safety and training and certification in place. So we check on a number of those things, and again, that's authorized by the House, Florida Senate, and the governor and our chief financial officer. A little bit later, I'm also going to introduce Kyle Biles with the Insurance Services Office under Verisk Analytics. And we partnered some years ago with the, I'm going to jump a slide for a second. We partnered with Chris Doolan and the leadership of the Small County Coalition, which, as you know, you're a member, and about 40 members now, I believe, Chris, to date. And so several years ago, a lot of the issues that you're talking about today and in the last several months here in Franklin County, these same issues have come up under a lot of the different members of the Small County Coalition. So the concept was, could we get together with the leadership of the Small County Coalition and also the Insurance Services Office and the State Fire Marshal, because a question came up on the phone there, how does this all fit together? What is the oversight? What are the regulations and criteria? So we thought, well, let's put a program together so that we could see the different facets of how a community that's trying to increase their level of service. Remember, the key thing to this presentation is that you are the elected county commission. So you are the authority having jurisdiction. We nickname that the AHJ, authority having jurisdiction. Now, a lot of that you delegate to your county coordinator, your county attorney, and other staff in the county. But as an elected official, almost every charter, as you look through the 40 counties and members of the Small County Coalition, with a little bit different verbiage, almost every county elects those commissioners and then a chairperson, and you become the authority having jurisdiction over a number of responsibilities. We talked earlier about public works and planning and zoning. There's many things, many hats that you wear as a county commission, and also one of your hats, because almost every charter will say that you're in charge of health, safety, and welfare of your community. And that's why you also have an elected sheriff, and you have a county coordinator to appoint other key leaders to take care of these other responsibilities of the authority having jurisdiction. So many highlights of the program that we built several years ago with the Small County Coalition will be part of this program. And stepping back for a moment, I want to share with you what is our authority as the state fire marshal? That question's come up. Well, there's one key thing that sort of drives a lot of what we do statewide in the fire protection service. And one of those is that the Florida statute drives 633.202 Florida statute says that the state fire marshal shall adopt, and we know when that word shall is in there what that means. We shall adopt the most recent edition of the National Fire Prevention Association Fire Code and Life Safety Code. That's nicknamed as NFPA 1 and 101, every 3 years with local Florida-specific amendments. There's also a statute, 633.128, says that the state fire marshal shall provide cost-effective training programs for the certification of firefighters and other fire-related fields pursuant to that statute. And then finally, the state fire marshal may issue, when requested by any substantially affected person or authority having jurisdiction, a declaratory statement interpreting the Florida Fire Prevention Code pursuant to 633.104 Florida statutes. Now, Mr. Schuler was much more proactive than that, and we appreciate that, because if we got hundreds and hundreds of declaratory statements, which is like a petition, if it involves more than one state agency, it has to go to the Attorney General of Florida. But if it's specific to either the state fire marshal or the Department of Business and Professional Regulation or the Department of Education and so on, you can request, what exactly does this statute mean? How is it interpreted in the application that we're trying to utilize that within Franklin County? So instead of doing that, it's much simpler to have a get-together like this, share some information so we can present recommendations and areas of guidance. And then you also can then later on get back with us through your staff and do follow-up questions. So very important. And I do want to mention that before I go to this next slide, let me just go back one. Some people were wondering if we were going to come over here and take over some of your fire departments or something like that. There was some articles in the newspaper that were alluding to things like that. Well, let me make it real clear. I guess I was bragging a little bit about, I've got 48 years in the fire service and all my staff have got well over 3 decades. But what we don't have is we don't have an army of fire personnel or a fleet of fire apparatus. We have a couple of fire trucks down at the Florida State Fire College to do fire training, but we don't have hundreds of trucks. So how would we go around the state and try to look at every single community and say, oh, you ought to be providing a higher level of service. We're just going to come over and take over. Well, we don't have the resources to do that. And of course, as you know, any of you that are well aware of our CFO, Jimmy Petronas, that's not the way he operates. He's all about public service, about how can we raise the bar, but also how can you do it in a fiscally responsible way. So I think more of the question is not, is the state fire marshal going to come in and take over, but can the state fire marshal give you some guidance and help with the insurance services office on some recommendations to how to do some mitigation, some community risk reduction efforts, reduce the risk of fire, public education. Ms. Jordan mentioned about what could we do as citizens in our community to do a safer job and work with our firefighters. Well, that's part of what public education and community risk reduction is all about. And the ISO rep, Kyle Biles, is going to talk about ways that you could do that later, that you can actually gain points without really costing a lot of money whatsoever. How can you do more public education, community risk reduction, and possibly reduce your insurance services office municipal grading schedule so that you could actually hopefully begin to reduce the cost of fire insurance within the community. That helps everybody. So that's really why we're here. And finally, my part, before I turn it over to my staff, and I'm a little bit long-winded, and that's why you can see now why we needed a workshop and not a 15-minute agenda item, but we will pick up the pace here in a little bit. One of the other key things we do is during a major disaster, such as a hurricane, tornadoes, severe flooding, anything of that nature, and Lord forbid, any type of disaster that would be a man-made disaster, such as a domestic security incident. But under the CFO, Petronas, and my leadership, we are in charge of what we call the Emergency Support Function 4, which is firefighting, and then Urban Search and Rescue, which is ESF 9. And we work together with the Florida Forest Service. If it's a wildland fire, we work together with Division of Emergency Management, with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and all the county sheriffs, and whatever type of major disaster. And we have resources. When I talked about those hundreds of fire trucks, the Florida Fire Chiefs Association has a state emergency response plan, and that's who we integrate, our local fire department. So if you had a disaster in this area, or when Hurricane Michael came through, we had personnel from as far south as Miami-Dade, all around the state coming in to assist with urban search and rescue and fire protection to help support and backfill the greater Panama City Beach. Well, you know, it affected several counties. So basically the whole panhandle was affected. But here a storm went from a Cat 2 to a Cat 5 and became an unprecedented disaster here in the Panhandle in 2018. We were busy with that storm for about 3 months. So that's what we do to help a community. And that's when we can bring in literally dozens, and if needed, hundreds of fire apparatus and urban search and rescue teams. So that's what the state really can do. Because if it's a declared disaster by the governor, that opens up special funding where we could come in and help you in times of a major disaster. And with that, I'm going to take, and we'll be back later on for questions and answers by the Board of Commissioners, Mr. Chair. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to some of my staff, and they're going to share about some of the other areas, and then the Insurance Services Office will share. So at this time, I'd like to ask my Assistant Director, Joanne Rice, to come up and talk about the fire incident reporting system.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Mr. Marone, Mr. Schuler, thank you for having us here today. This is just a quick stop right now, and I'm going to turn it over to some other folks as well, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about our fire and emergency incident reporting system. My name is Joanne Rice, and I'm the Assistant Director with the Division of State Fire Marshal. The fire incident reporting system is actually the system that we have in place for all of Florida that we allow our folks to report all their annual incidents to the state that we use typically to come up with our annual report. That is one of the requirements for the State Fire Marshal's office, is to produce an annual report. Those annual reports are usually used for our local fire departments to be able to go out and do fire prevention operations, identify how many fires they have in their community, identify any trends that they may have. The reporting system is actually voluntary, but we do have requirements if you're going to get a grant. We talked about these green buckets. So if you're going to get grants, or you're going to get any of the volunteer grants or the other infrastructure grants, we do require that you maintain your incident reporting system. The stuff that comes in through our fire departments in Florida also goes up to the National Fire Incident Reporting System, because one of the things that they do is they also issue, looking at national trends, and they issue an annual report nationally. And so we maintain that through the Florida Fire Incident Reporting System. Fortunately, over the next couple of years, hope to see that system become a little bit more robust of a system so that we can continue to get information out, and hopefully in less than an annual report, but have something that comes out more quarterly. But this is one of the systems that we are working on currently to make sure we've got that up to date. But it's an important piece of what we do. In the incident reporting system, we also make sure that we, if there are any firefighter injuries or any firefighter deaths, that is also reported through that system, so that we can continue to tabulate that through the state, and again, identify any trends or any things, might identify training needs, those sorts of things. But it's an important part of the of what we have to do at the State Fire Marshal's office. I think that covers everything on our Florida Incident Reporting System. It's a robust system, and again, it goes up to the National Fire Incident Reporting System. And I believe with that, I am going to ask Bureau Chief Mark Harper to come up and talk a little bit about the Bureau of Fire Standards and Training.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Mark Harper. I'm the Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Fire Standards and Training. And this bureau within the State Fire Marshal's office provides 4 primary functions. It's a training section, has a standard section for certification, safety section, and also the executive development. So within the training section, we work and develop all the training throughout the state when it leads to certification. But we also work with subject matter experts with developing training programs that lead to outside, or that would be outside of certification, but a really need to know for whatever the industry that we're working with at the time. So we work with the development and also the testing that goes along with that. Now, our standard section, they've got functions that manage the certification aspects. So from firefighter 1 up to our executive level, they're working with all the testing and requirements to meet that certification. And we also work with Pearson View, which is our third party that has 23 testing sites around the state. So we try to make this as available as possible around the state for all of the fire service to obtain their certifications. The other aspect of what the standard section does is the national accreditation. We work with Pro Board and IFSACs because we want to make sure that what we're doing here within the state measures or meets or exceeds that which is required nationally around the country. The standard section also works with and certifies 51 certified training centers around the state. And what that means is out of these 51, they can offer the basic training to become a certified fighter in this state and become employed. There are other training facilities around the state, but the certification, they have to have a burn building, have to have a truck that's certified, and just certain equipment available to meet those requirements to teach that level of training. The executive officer development. So as we progress through the fire service, we want to make sure that they not only have that foundation, but then we start teaching supervisory skills, tactics and strategy and building construction and inspection programs. All these certifications are managed under the standard section supervisor. The thing with the Bureau is that we're also housed at the Florida State Fire College, as Director Hallis said a few minutes ago. And a quick history with the Fire College was in 1930, we had the first organized fire service training offered statewide. And then in 1951, we had the first fixed for the state, the first fixed training center, which was constructed in downtown Ocala. And in 1989, a new facility, which is the current location for our fire college, was built just on the north end of Ocala. So this is one of the ways that we meet that statutory obligation of providing cost-effective training for the fire service around the state. There are colleges and other training centers around the state, but we, for the State Fire Marshal's Office, offer this training where people can come, and it is a full-service facility. We have dorms, cafeteria, lecture halls, classrooms, and then also the offices for the Bureau. We just finished up this past Sunday our volunteer week of training. It ran from Thursday to this past Sunday, and then we had 60 to 70 participants. This training was offered free to the participants. We had instructors for forestry classes, for arson investigation, engine operations, grant information that was shared. So we had a really good turnout. We had sponsors that offered a luncheon for them, so we really tried to make this a good experience for our volunteers. So again, that's one of the ways that we meet our statutory obligation in offering this training to our volunteers. So the other aspect of our responsibilities is within the safety section, and I'm going to ask Susan Schell, who is our safety section supervisor, to come in and tell you a little bit about that.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us here today to share information with you. I am Susan Schell. I'm in charge of the Firefighter Occupational Safety and Health Administration section, our safety section. Our responsibility is to make sure that as our firefighters, volunteer firefighters, career firefighters go to work, that it's done in a safe manner. There are certain rules and regulations over what levels of training they need in order to respond to fires, to drive safely there. Once they are there, that they're properly trained to go into that structure fire to extinguish that fire. So we do not have a line of duty death or an injury. Should a line of duty death occur or an injury occur they're hospitalized more than 24 hours, the safety section will do a full investigation to determine if there were any safety issues, how to correct those issues, to assure that this does not happen again in the future. The other thing that the safety section does is when there are concerns that come up, we will do a safety audit. We'll go in and talk to them. And if we do find things that are astray with the safety, we will work with that department to make sure they are compliant with the safety statutes as outlined in 633 and 69A. The other issue and activity that falls underneath the firefighter safety is the cancer decontamination grant. This is one of the grants Director Hallis spoke about. It is a matching grant. 25% is paid by the local authority having jurisdiction. The other 75% of the cost is picked up by the state. This grant allows for the purchase of second sets of Nomex hoods, gloves, and ear flaps, because we have found that firefighters suffer higher rates of cancer than any other profession. And through research with Sylvester Cancer, we've identified that they need to be changing those gloves and hoods out after every fire. It will also cover the cost of extractors. Those are so we can clean our turnout gear because it holds those carcinogens. So we oversee that side of the grant as well. So that's our occupational safety and health section. Thank you.
It's really important that we take full advantage of the decontamination equipment, the grants, the funding that's there, the programs that are in place to keep our firefighters safe. Because one of the things I forgot to mention that is also the home at the Florida State Fire College is the Fallen Firefighter Memorial. Last year, unfortunately, we placed 18 names on that memorial. This year so far, we have 13 names pending to be approved to be put on there. So when it comes to the safety of our fire service personnel, we take it serious and we try to do our best to make sure information and equipment's available to the fire service around the state. There's 3 other grants that I want to discuss that are available. One, we've had a great partnership over the last, I believe, 6 years. You can correct me, Director, if I'm wrong, but with the University of Miami, cancer research. And, oops, sorry. Thank you. With the cancer research. So this agency, this educational and research facility has just conducted great research working with local fire departments, trying to determine how the fire service personnel are impacted by heat, what kind of contaminants and carcinogens are exposure for different amounts of time, and it's helped us to identify the types of cancers that our fire service personnel are exposed to. Another grant that's available is the Volunteer Firefighter Assistance Grant. Now this is a $1 million reoccurring grant that is available, and we usually open up July 1 and try to have all the money distributed throughout that year. We also have the Fire Construction and Equipment Grant. Melissa Demeser, that's online with us, she has oversight of that. It's more of a fixed capital for construction or engine apparatus, fire apparatus. These are sort of large purchases. I believe, sorry if I don't say it right, but Fort Coombs, they're recipients or will be recipients of $350,000 fire sprinkler system to be installed to help with that. So, you know, this is available throughout all the state. Application periods are opened up and we have people vet them and then try to get these funds. And all this is through the support of our CFO, Jimmy Petronas. He's just been a fantastic supporter. So the Firefighter Assistance Grant, this has been effective since 2016. And again, this is a reoccurring $1 million grant. And this past year, 21-22, Charlie Frank is our point of contact with that. And we've had 17 departments that are going to be recipients of, oops, I'm on a roll. I just,
Slowing you down.
recipients of protective gear, of all the PPE, the air packs. And so this has been very effective because many of these departments, they just do not have the funding. So this has been a great opportunity for these departments to apply. Charlie Frank and a small team vetted the grants, and we try to get this information out and equipment out to them as quickly as possible. But one of the things that's hopefully after July 1, if it's signed, we're going to be able to expand this equipment to wildland PPE, protective equipment, getting the ensemble thermal imaging cameras, gas detectors, rescue equipment. So, this has been going on for a few years, so we're trying to do our best to make sure that we can provide the necessary equipment for these departments and personnel to have everything they need to help their communities that they're working in. So one note that I want to bring to this group is that, and you can help us get the word out, is in 2018-19, St. James applied, but it seems like nothing was awarded, that it may not have been completed or whatever the reason may be. And then also St. George. So our staff and Susan will work any way that we can to help make sure they understand they have all the components, and this is one of the areas where a safety compliance inspection is required. But when they go in, they're trying to do everything they can to make sure these agencies are safe, have all the equipment and the safety guidelines in place so they can function the way they need to. And I think that is it. Thank you. It's John Gatlin.
Next slide.
Is that Mac computer?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Gatlin, Bureau Chief of Fire Prevention. We talked about some of the responsibilities. You heard the term AHJ. So one of the things the Bureau of Fire Prevention is the authority having jurisdiction over state buildings. Within your community, you have a number of state buildings. You have some prisons, you have DP, you have forestry. All of those buildings which are state-owned fall underneath the authority of the State Fire Marshal from a jurisdictional standpoint. How we manage those buildings? Well, we have 4 different sections within the Bureau of Fire Prevention. One is our plans review. So any state building that has any renovation, any new state building that is being built, those plans have to come through the State Fire Marshal's office for review. You see a similar thing in your community. New construction comes through your area to ensure that it meets the fire safety standards that have been adopted throughout the state that we talked about previously. On an ongoing basis, we have an inspection section that inspects buildings throughout the entire state of Florida. So we have close to 14,000 of those buildings. The key here is that those people are field resources for local municipalities, local communities, local counties. Though you're still the AHJ, which we'll talk about in a little more detail, these are resources that can be called upon to answer those questions. No different than the state as a whole or the plans review. Those are people that have been doing this for years, have a lot of experience, knowledge, and training, and can be a resource to help guide local communities through that process. Another section is our regulatory licensing. So all of these, we talked about the sprinkler system that's been awarded, fire extinguishers that are in all of these buildings. Those people that go around, those contractors, the State Fire Marshal ensures that they are properly trained and properly licensed through our regulatory section. Annually or biannually, they have to certify through a continual CEUs that they're up to date and register with the State Fire Marshal's office. So we maintain that certification and registration and ensure that everything is appropriate and that what they're doing is within the adopted standards. An additional section that seems somewhat out of place when we talk to people is our boiler safety section. So within Florida statute, boilers over a certain size or in public assembly locations have to be registered with the state of Florida. And our boiler safety section maintains a list of those, ensures compliance, and similar to what you see with elevators, we issue an annual license to ensure that they are current and properly maintained. I'll let Assistant Director Rice talk about what a fire service provider is.
All right. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Joanne Rice, Assistant Director, Division of State Fire Marshal. So I'm probably going to answer a few of the questions that Mr. Berry had online before. So we're going to talk about right now, what is a fire service provider? And a fire service provider is really anyone who employs a career firefighter or uses volunteer firefighters for fire extinguishment, fire prevention activities, fire and life safety education activities, those types of things. And so So who is responsible for that? By Florida statute 633.102, any municipality, a county such as yourself, a special district, a political subdivision, the state, or organizations under contract or other agreement with such entities to provide services. Fact is, Franklin County is a fire service provider. You guys have that responsibility as the county. So what are some of the responsibilities of a fire service provider? First, it's really important to maintain properly trained personnel per 633.408. They've got to be trained commensurate to the duty that they're going to be providing. If you have volunteer firefighters, you need to make sure that you have enough volunteer firefighters to make entry for structural firefighters, and have the firefighters that have the certificate of compliance to make sure that, like I said, they're commensurate with the duties. Additionally, need to make sure that they maintain proper record keeping per 633.502 through 536. You got to maintain fire department rosters, maintain all the training records, maintain and report any firefighter injuries or firefighter deaths, and maintain record keeping of any medical evaluations that are provided. Additional responsibilities is to provide a safe working environment. Per 69A-62, that the fire station's presence of toxic substance, that maybe they have the exhaust evacuation systems, those sort of things, and maintain separation of their firefighting gear from the apparatus bay. There's certain provisions for that. And that there's a safety committee and a safety coordinator. This is a big part of what Susan Shell does when she goes out to the fire stations, is making sure that all those fire service responsibilities are being complied with, that the personnel are properly trained, that we're maintaining the records, that we provide a safe working equipment, and safe working environment, and that we also provide safe equipment for them, that their self-contained breathing apparatus work. They have annual fit testing to make sure that the breathing apparatus fit appropriately and don't leak. And that they have personal protective equipment that is within a certain lifespan, and that it is up to date and is able to be used when they're out there on a fire, to make sure that, again, that they stay safe. That's their primary responsibility of a fire service provider. So those persons that are employed by a fire service provider are authorized to enforce laws and rules of the state fire marshal. So we talk about chiefs of county, municipal and special districts for fire service providers, other fire service providers, personnel designated by their respective chiefs, and then personnel designated by a local government having no organized fire service providers. That's kind of where you guys fall in, as you've got volunteer agencies around your county, and that's where you have the responsibility to oversee those agencies. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chief Gatlin. He's going to get it, as he talked a little bit previously about the authority having jurisdiction. And actually, before I mention that, I just want, sorry, John. When we were driving down here, one of the things we talked about, the distance coming down here, Chief Gatlin mentioned that we have fire inspectors that are a great resource for you all. But this is quite a ways down here. So when they come down here, it's a day trip, because we've got facilities, we got state facilities, got a correction center, got some of the state parks that they have to come down and inspect. But there is opportunity when they're down here for you guys to be able to use them as a resource. You know, if they're coming down here for a full day, that if you've got questions or needs, there's certainly somebody that you can tap into. Chief Gatlin, I'll turn it back over to you.
So we talked a little bit about the authority having jurisdiction. So as that fire service provider, that makes you the authority having jurisdiction. So what does that really mean? So the responsibilities of the authority having jurisdiction is to enforce those aspects of statute and rule surrounding fire protection, including the enforcement of the Florida Fire Prevention Code. The Florida Fire Prevention Code is a responsibility of the State Fire Marshal's Office on a triennial basis to develop and adopt with local and public input. Currently, we have the 7th edition of the Florida Fire Prevention Code that went into effect December 31st of 2020. So the purpose of this code is to provide a minimum uniform fire code throughout the state. So the minimum code that you find in Pensacola is the same minimum code you find in Miami-Dade County. And what's the advantage of that? One, it provides uniformity. It helps from a construction standpoint to provide some consistency so that when you have contractors and other development that comes in, that there's not a change if they just cross a county line. Doesn't mean that as a local community you don't have specific hazards or specific situations that you need to address. And within 633, you as a local government have the ability to have those local amendments to that. But again, this is uniform minimum standard. But as an HJ, you have that responsibility and that authority to enforce that within your community. Again, we kind of touched on this. Each municipality and county or special district shall enforce the Florida Fire Prevention Code. That is a requirement. Again, it's a minimum standard throughout there, and it is a requirement of those counties, municipalities to enforce that code. I touched on the fact that the state is the AHJ for state buildings, and that's what we do. We on the state-owned properties, we ensure that those facilities on an annual basis meet that minimum standard and address any violations that we find. We don't have the authority as a state to enforce at a local level. We can be a resource, we can assist, we can give some opinions outside of a declaratory statement. The difference between, our opinion is based on our training and experience that we've had throughout our years. We've got a number of people years of service. Another opportunity from an education standpoint is we have an informal process for the Florida Fire Prevention Code. That as an AHJ is free of charge. You can ask questions that are non-binding and get that direction through this committee that is developed throughout the entire state to help guide. Finally, the declaratory statement is, as you heard before, a very formal process. It is a binding interpretation that comes through the state and through the legal department, is a component of interpreting the Florida Fire Prevention Code for HJs. So a little bit about responsibilities. We talked about NFPA 1 and NFPA 101. Both of those codes independently can be found through the National Fire Protection Association, but together they make the Florida Fire Prevention Code, one document. So when you see here, these are excerpts from those particular sections of NFPA 1. It gives you the authority as the HJ to administer the code. Talks about inspecting, that you have the authority to inspect at reasonable times buildings or premises and determine the hazards or dangerous aspects of it, and to inspect construction and installation. So again, as a local HJ, that is a responsibility and an authority that you have to ensure that your community is safe and is complying with the minimum standards that are set throughout the state. So with that, I'll call up Director Howlett for introductions.
Thank you very much, Chief Gatlin. And now it's important that we make a little transition here, and I want to explain. There are states. I'm privileged to serve the last 4 years as the president of the National Association of State Fire Marshals. In our 50 states around the country, some of the states' fire marshal are in charge of the entire state because they're small enough to hire enough personnel and do that. You can imagine in Florida with 500 jurisdictions that we have over 100 personnel just to manage the 14,000 state buildings that Chief Gatlin spoke about and the responsibilities that Chief Harper spoke about of training, certification, and safety. If we were in charge of another 500 jurisdictions and every local commercial building, high-rise condominium, you name it, across the board, and all municipal and county buildings, we would have to have hundreds and hundreds of additional personnel. It would just be enormous. So that's why Florida is structured the way it is. Now, when you're a major metropolitan area, what we might call a Class 1 fire department, graded by the Insurance Services Office, that's a very robust municipality with a lot of resources and a lot of tax money. But in Florida, because we do have some rural areas, the Insurance Services Office doesn't come in and tell you exactly how to run your county either, but they are going to ascertain for the insurance community what level of protection you can provide, and that gets a grade. And so we want to learn more about how they do that and what that means to the community and the way that Florida is set up legislatively. So at this time, I'd like to ask our senior field representative from the Insurance Services Office, Kyle Biles, to come up and share the next part of the program. Thank you, Kyle. And he flew in last night to be here, just to let you know. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually in Charlotte 24 hours ago presenting to the state fire marshal's office there. So thank you, Director and Chairman and Commissioners. Appreciate this opportunity to represent ISO and talk to y'all. My name is Kyle Biles, like the Director mentioned. I'm a senior field rep with ISO, and I've been doing this for almost 15 years now. And 15 years ago, ISO was a very closed book. You know, we had our rules, we had our schedules, we came out and evaluated communities, and there really wasn't a lot of information that was presented to the AHJ, to fire departments, to water systems, to communication centers, which is all things we evaluate. And you know, we've worked really hard in the subsequent time since then to really get the word out, to be more of an open book, to be able to come and do presentations like this and go to conferences and meet with fire departments and teach classes, which I do on a regular basis, to the fire service and water departments and communications, to let them know what exactly our evaluation is, what it's a part of, what we're looking for, and give them and y'all all the tools and information that we possibly can so you can get the very best PPC classification that your community can obtain. So just as an overview, ISO is an advisory organization for the insurance industry. We come out and we evaluate communities all across the country, and ISO does 45 of the states. There are a handful of states that are bureau states where they do their own evaluations. And so, you know, we come in, we evaluate a community's level of fire protection, and really what we're evaluating is a community's ability to limit fire severity. From an insurance company point of view, we want to know that your community has the correct, you know, emergency communications center with the appropriate staffing. We've got firefighters and that are properly located and properly trained and have the equipment to respond to the fire with the appropriate amount of water so that they can extinguish that fire and limit fire severity. That's really what this is all about. In addition to that, now, since 2012, when we had our newest schedule, or version of our newest schedule, we also included a community risk reduction, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. And there's a lot of information there about and a lot of ways that communities can improve their score. It's actually extra credit, if you will. We didn't change the scale, we just provided more credit. And it's ways that your community can prevent these fires from happening. But it is important to remember that the ISO PPC score, Public Protection Classification Score, is applicable primarily to the fire portion of homeowners and commercial insurance policies. You know, we're an advisory organization. What the insurance companies end up doing with those classifications is really not part of what we are a part of. We're just advising them. But we do that all across the country. And as I mentioned, we do look at the fire department. That's the biggest portion of our evaluation, and I'll show you the scale in just a minute. But we do evaluate the fire department. That's worth 50 points. We do evaluate communications, and that's worth 10 points, and then the water department is worth 40 points for a total of 100 points. In addition to that, we have 5.5 points of extra credit, if you will, for under the community risk reduction section. Since 2012, and since we had a new schedule, we've seen a huge shift in the improvement of classifications, especially here in the state of Florida. We've seen a huge shift in improvements, and that's part of it is the hard work that y'all are doing, hard work of your fire departments and water departments in your communities. And so we want to make sure that we reflect that in our evaluation. At its core, you know, the fire department section really looks at, and I won't go into too much detail, I can if you'd like. The fire department really evaluates the apparatus. Do they have the appropriate apparatus, whether that's engine companies, ladder companies, service companies that they may need. We evaluate the personnel, whether that's on-call personnel, your paid firefighters that are in the stations, on-duty personnel paid in the stations, on-call personnel, which are your volunteers responding from house, church, wherever. We even have some public safety departments here in Florida, which we evaluate as well for the personnel. We also evaluate the training. The training is a big part of the evaluation that we do. And we see a lot, as you can imagine, that's a spectrum of departments, and we see really a huge spectrum of training. Communications, like I mentioned, is all about getting the call, getting that dispatch out. We work really hard and present a lot to the communication organizations. We really evaluate how quickly your comm center, your 911 center, the location where the 911 calls go, how quickly they answer and dispatch the appropriate units. And that's a big part of their evaluation. We also look at the radio systems, the methods that they use to dispatch, which could be different for your paid firefighters in the stations versus your volunteers at home or what have you. And then finally, the water supply, and this is really where there's a lot of misinformation out there. 40% of the score really is your water score. It's really the capability of your water systems and the ability to put that water, have that water available for responding departments to extinguish these fires. And so we work a lot with the local AHJ, folks as yourselves, as well as the water suppliers in the area to ensure that what we know about their water system, what it's capable of. We also check to see how often someone, the fire department or the water department, is inspecting the hydrants. Hydrants are an integral part of this whole process. So we want to know that someone is going out and checking these hydrants and flow testing these hydrants to make sure that they work. And then finally, the community risk reduction. We'll go into more detail on that in just a minute. So that's a quick shot at our scale. That scale has been the same since 1980. So we haven't really changed the scale, although we have changed some of the rules and some of the things we provide credit for. But that's a scale. And as you can see, it goes from Class 1, which is the very best level of fire protection that we can evaluate. And we have a large number of those communities here in the state, all the way down to Class 9 and Class 10. Class 9 are communities that meet some minimum criteria. But they do not, generally they meet the minimum criteria of our schedule, but they have no water system that they can use to extinguish fires. And Class 10 is no fire protection at all. I think this is a good place to talk about our minimum criteria. When we come in to evaluate a community, our fire suppression rating schedule, which is the document that we use, which is accepted by the state, that we use to evaluate fire protection, has certain minimum criteria for us to even start the discussion about where they're going to fall within this scale. And unfortunately, we have seen a uptick over the last several years in a large number of some communities that are going to be a Class 10 community because they cannot meet the minimum criteria of the schedule. There's a number of minimum things. There needs to be a fire chief and a boundary, an engine that meets certain criteria. The one that's the two that are really applicable to most departments are that each fire department must provide 12 hours of structure fire related training to their firefighters. Believe it or not, we have a number of departments that don't provide any training at all. So that is in violation of the minimum criteria of our schedule. Also, the really big one is that each fire department, in order to be evaluated by ISO and meet that minimum criteria, must respond with a minimum of 4 certified firefighters to all structure fires in their fire protection area. When we talk about volunteers, on-call personnel is the term we use, we need to know that they have received the appropriate training and that they are registered with the fire college so that we know that they are meeting the state requirements to be a volunteer firefighter. We have lots of folks in fire departments all across this state, lots of volunteers in fire departments all across this state that don't meet that criteria. And we've seen, and in the 15 years I've been doing this, I've watched the average response of volunteers across the board, not everywhere, drop. We're right now, that average response in a lot of fire departments is very close to 4, if not below. And that's really the thing that we need to make sure when we look at these volunteer fire departments in order to keep their ISO classification, which affects the property owner's insurance rates in their district. We need to know that they're still meeting that minimum criteria for firefighters that meet state requirements responding to all structure fires. That's the big one. So we need to just always keep that in mind. That's where those volunteers, that roster of folks that are trained, they're active, they're involved, they're responding to fires. That's where that's very, very important. So I'm going to talk real quick about the community risk reduction section, which is it was a new thing for us in 2012. It was not in the previous schedule, but we know other states, specifically Texas, had some of this stuff in their schedule or in their state stuff. And so, we have found that the community risk reduction, and we're going to talk about 3 portions of that really quickly here. but you know, we can see here in the state of Florida how good of a job your departments, the authority having jurisdiction, does in leading those folks and making sure that we can eliminate these fires. We can prevent these fires through prevention, through education. That's a great thing. And obviously insurance companies are happy with fires that don't occur. So, so the first part of this is the fire prevention code adoption and enforcement. And really what we're looking at here is, you know, are we under the current code? Do we have proper staffing in your fire protection area to enforce that code? Is there training, certification? How often are you inspecting these buildings? Is there a plan review? Is there a quality assurance program? And is there integration between the folks doing these fire prevention activities and the firefighters? So really it's all about getting out to the buildings in your community annually and making sure that they meet the fire prevention code that's in force, and that requires staffing and certification and you know, training of those personnel. We evaluate all of that in this section. The next section is the public fire safety education, and this is really looking at how you're educating your population. You know, how are you letting your folks know how to prevent fires? We're going to evaluate what the methods of teaching for your educators. We're going to evaluate their continuing education, and we're going to evaluate what percentage of your population are you really reaching with fire safety education programs. You know, I always say, don't say just Facebook. Not that there's a problem with Facebook, but just not everybody's on Facebook. So, you know, there needs to be a plethora of mechanisms that you're using to get that message out to your community about fire safety education, whatever that might be. It could be, you know, smoke detectors, you know, safe cooking practices, don't fry frozen turkeys, whatever it might be. You know, we're going to evaluate all of those. We're also going to look at the Juvenile Fire Center Intervention Program, and then we're also going to look at education to facilities with a large loss of life potential. Things like assisted living facilities and other facilities where you have, you know, where you could have that potential for a large loss of life should there be a fire in that location. And so we're evaluating all of that. We're very thankful that the Division of State Fire Marshal's Office, you know, does have their certification for the Public Fire and Life Safety Educator Program. I also work in other states, and other states don't have these same programs. And so you have folks who want to get certifications and get more information on how to provide fire safety education, and unfortunately they don't have as many resources. So we're very fortunate that we do have this program. And then finally, we look at fire investigation. And when we say fire investigation, most folks immediately think suspicious fires, arson, right? And that's certainly something that is incorporated in this. But from an insurance company point of view, we also want to know about cause and origin of fires for purposes of subrogation. You know, if a fire starts in a dryer, is that because the dryer malfunctioned? That's something insurance companies want to know. Or is it because they just put too much stuff in the dryer or what have you? And so those are the types of things that incorporate into this investigation. Again, it's similar to the other programs. We're going to look at fire investigation staffing, certification, and continuing education. And we're very familiar and work with the State Fire Marshal's Office. We know when their office comes out to conduct their investigations. And like I mentioned, we want to see other programs as well. And then finally, as Assistant Director Rice mentioned, we actually provide credit for using the National Fire Incident Reporting System through the Florida Fire Incident Reporting System. So these fire departments that are reporting their structure fires through that program, we can actually give them credit for that as well. So which is a great thing. So most of what the folks behind me were talking about that they do and is part of, we provide credit in the side of the schedule for almost all of that. So you know, we want to definitely provide that credit. This is a countrywide breakdown of the classifications across the country. And as I mentioned, we've seen this uptick in Class 10 communities. And it's also important to mention that insurance companies are not okay with this. They're asking us to look at these things and find out why. Same thing with Class 9 communities. We've been working hard for the last 5 or 10 years to try to reduce those Class 9 communities. You know, you've got a lot of communities that have an active fire department with active folks showing up. They're properly trained. They just don't have any pressurized water systems. So through our evaluation, we can actually credit alternative water supply methods, such as shuttling the water from a certified point or what have you, doing long hose lays, lots of different things that we can talk to them about to try to get their community, and hence the policyholders in that community, a better classification by using different water sources other than just pressurized hydrants. And so this is sort of like I mentioned earlier as well, we've seen this shift to the left as folks are improving. And we want to continue that shift. We want to continue to have a relationship and provide information to your departments. So I'm going to close with this. As I started with, 15 years ago when I started, we were sort of a closed book, and we've sort of moved away from that. ISO is here for you. We are here for you. I am here for you. If you or your fire departments ever have any questions at all about, what can I do to fix my ISO score? If I do this, am I going to mess up my PPC classification? We are here for you. There's myself and some other field reps who work here in the state, so any one of us may come do the evaluations. But we are here to help you, to provide whatever information that we possibly can. Obviously, we're not here to run your fire departments. But we are here to talk about, what it is that we recommend what we can do and make sure that when we come in to do the official classification, the official evaluation, that we don't mess things up. A couple of your fire departments are due for are due for evaluations currently, and so we'll be reaching out to some of them here probably later this year, just to talk about maybe setting something up so we can come in and do those evaluations. So again, I really appreciate your time. If there's anything that the Insurance Services Office can do to answer any questions that y'all might have, please let me know. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Biles. And, one thing that we promised the Small County Coalition several years ago is that we would put this program together to share information to the local jurisdictions. Now, just like they said, they're not going to run your fire department, we're not either. But I kind of look at it like, you can go to Vegas on vacation, or we can go right down the street here, and this is a beautiful community. Okay. The thing is the difference is, what is our budget? If we don't have the budget to go to Vegas, there's lots of places to go right here in Florida, and lots of reasons to stay in Florida too, for that matter. I'm proud to be a fire chief in Florida and a director and work for the state fire marshal. So I think the important thing from this is these are all like little building blocks, little parts of a puzzle, and that's why we're so thankful. I came up to the service, when you're talking about the grading schedule back in the 80s and 90s, we were doing all kinds of public education, pre-fire planning, all different things. And we were trying to we would send fire rescue resources from Sarasota out into the unincorporated area way east of the interstate, because we only had one unit out there. They couldn't respond for personnel. Now I'll tell you one real quick story in summary, just to show you how this ISO working with your local leadership can work. Baldwin, small community in Duval County. Baldwin, the mayor called me over a decade ago, and he said, "We've got a problem." They had about 7 or 8 personnel in Baldwin, the public works personnel, everybody they could muster up to become volunteer firefighters. They had gotten where they were to a grade 8. So they were saving some money from a grade 9, A or B or a 10. But they were having trouble sustaining the volunteer firefighters. One of the public works personnel had an injury that restricted him from being able to go on fires. So as they were starting to lose some personnel and recruitment and retention was difficult for them, what they did was they decided they would go ahead and do an interlocal agreement with Jacksonville Fire Rescue, had 45 fire stations. Would you believe that when Jacksonville signed that interlocal agreement with them and put 1 fire truck in Baldwin, they went immediately to a grade 10? Well, I'm like, that can't be. What do you mean? You signed up with one of the largest metro departments in the state of Florida. And so we got together with the ISO and the leadership from Baldwin and Jacksonville. What we found out was The next closest fire station was 5.5 miles away in Jacksonville. So their mutual aid was not close enough to give enough credit for immediately responding personnel. So what we were able to do, we were able to reconstitute their volunteers in Baldwin and supplement the unit from Jacksonville. By sharing resources from some of the different jurisdictions in the community, you could send every fire department you have on an incident, and that's way more than 4, but they've got to be within certain jurisdictional miles and things of this nature to get to the incident in a reasonable amount of time. So I think the summary of this is, we probably started out real good, cordial, and then you see some of these slides and you probably think, wow, you just put the weight of the world on my shoulders as an elected county commissioner. We can't become a grade 1 or 2. What are you doing bringing us some of these fancy slides? I mean, I would be taken back if I was your fire chief right now. I'd be like, oh wow, this was a tremendous revelation. So we have to work together, and not just in Franklin County, in the state of Florida. Like I was telling you, the reason I put that slide in there about Hurricane Michael and major disasters, can you imagine if we wouldn't have had anybody to send? We would have had to rely on other FEMA teams coming from up north and stuff like that, and had 3-4 days before we got on the ground in Panama City Beach. No, instead we brought in Jacksonville, Louisiana, Tennessee, and we were on the ground in less than 24 hours in Panama City Beach. And my boss was sitting there watching hospitals go down and everything like that. And Jimmy Petronas called me and said, what are we going to do to help the firefighters that just lost their homes? So we can all get that same reality check. It don't matter how many departments you have when something like that hits you. We're all in the same boat together. So with that, I really appreciate your time. Mr. Schuler, I know that you, wanted this to be clearly that, we just come and share, and so we did. Mr. Marone, I appreciate the invitation. This is not the last time you're going to see us. We'll be here, and if you get together with if you get all your fire community personnel together and you hold another workshop, we can bring some of our staff to start talking about the training and certification and capabilities and things like that of how could we share resources without raising a ton of taxes that wouldn't be something that you could just do immediately like that. What are creative ways that you can do it more cost effective and get some of those 5.5 free bonus points to maybe go from a grade 10 to a grade 9 on some of the fire jurisdictions without spending a lot of new taxes, and save people some cost on their fire insurance premium component of their policy. For commercial and residential, it affects both. So with that, we appreciate your time. Thanks to my staff, thanks to the ISO, and thanks to the Small County Coalition. Chris, I appreciate you being here today, sir. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Chairman Jones for questions and answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry we went a little bit late.
No, you're good. We were all here for the same reason.
Thank you, sir.
You're good. Any questions, commissioners, that you have?
Yes, sir, I have a couple.
Okay, go ahead.
Is there any correlation for a lower ISO score relative to a fire department that has paid personnel versus volunteer personnel? Do you see paid personnel departments having a lower ISO score in Florida than non-paid? I know there are lots of factors involved, but I'm looking at that factor called paid.
Generally speaking, I'll comment and then I'll ask Kyle to do so also. Generally speaking, Commissioner, as long as they're certified personnel, they have the points for the training, the standard training and different things, and they're certified in our database. And if they have the same, capability of local water supply and the communication system, no, they can score the same points from a volunteer basis. Now, the paid personnel will usually put more of them on duty that they could respond quicker. That's why some volunteers will actually spend the night in the fire station so they can respond quicker. Others will maybe respond on a pager system or whatever from their home. And as long as they're dispatched simultaneously, I'll ask Kyle to comment on that, is how do you strategically get those volunteers to all count on that first alarm is what we call that when 911 says we have a potential smoke showing in a residence or commercial business. Kyle, can you comment on that?
And that's a great question. That's a very typical question that we get. So in the schedule, in the math, if you will, of our calculations, when we credit, it's very important that we use the term on-call and on-duty, not paid or volunteer. And the reason we force that, just like the director said, is it's not so much whether they get a paycheck or not. The question is, where are they responding from? If you're on duty at a fire station, there you receive more credit for the personnel, if we count it one-to-one, if you will. You get more credit for the folks that are on duty at the fire station rather than the ones that are on call from home or church or fishing or whatever it is that they're doing. And so there is a correlation between those two in that the on-duty folks are receiving slightly more credit than the on-call. Now, that doesn't mean that on-call departments can't get all of those same classifications, including a Class 1. It's just going to take more on-call personnel to meet the needs of the schedule as opposed to on-duty, because on-duty carry more weight, if you will. Does that answer your, is that?
It does,
Okay,
yes.
good.
I just had one other one, Mr. Chairman. Have you heard of a program relative to high schools in Florida that have high school students, maybe juniors and seniors, that are volunteering in volunteer fire departments, in exchange for which there's some sort of a scholarship going forward into college?
You've heard of that? Susan? Yes, there are some high school programs, and while Mark's coming up, let me mention also, Mr. Chair, we've worked with Department of Education to not only have some high school training firefighter programs, also a combined EMT and firefighter training, so you can register one time and come out from the entire program as an EMT and a firefighter, so that way some departments require that as a minimum, that you not only be firefighter, but you have EMT. So we do have some creative programs that we've worked together with the other Department of Health and the Department of Education. Mark, high school program?
Yes, sir, good question. We have several active high school programs throughout the state, and many of them will have their program run from 2 or 3 years through graduation. Now, as far as being able to count them as a volunteer, no, sir, because they still are not able to complete that certification process to where they can enter the ideal age. But the program itself, like the director said, as far as the firefighting and EMT, as these students are completing the process up to the end of graduation, turn 18, then they can complete their training, their clinicals, and the live fire training that's required. And by 19 years of age, they can become very productive and active on the force in their area.
Very good.
And it is a great way to recruit people in your area,
Yes.
to get them involved and to see if that's something they want to do. Good question.
Good.
And Commissioner, the IDLH he referred to, that's the dangerous to life and health. So in other words, as a high school student, until they get a certain age and pass their testing, they're not able to enter what we would term as the hot zone inside of firefighter. Now, there are other opportunities also. You can have support personnel. So some of the volunteers, while they're starting to get some training to become a volunteer firefighter 1, they can do some outside things, help the department, as long as they're on the roster and they're actually a member of the fire department, they can actually start helping with fire hose and other outside duties if they're in the cold zone. So they have to be out in there, and that's why we talk about training commensurate to duty. But only those that can go in that hot zone, that dangerous area of a fire, then have to be duly certified, at least a firefighter 1 level or firefighter 2. Commissioner.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Any other questions, Commissioners?
I'd just like to say that, as you were alluding to, a fireman and an EMT, which is basically known as dual certification, that also bumps you up a pay grade. When you go into a paid fire department, when you got dual certification, it increases your pay because you're dual certified. So I just wanted to put that out there.
That's correct, sir. Many cases, that is very correct. And some departments even then will take that firefighter because they have an EMT, and then maybe within a year, they'll start sending them to paramedic school if they have the capability to do that locally, and then that also will take them to even a higher tier for those areas that do advanced life support transport where they would need a paramedic.
I have a couple of questions if nobody else has any. no particular order. Just writing some stuff down, and I don't remember who was speaking every time I was writing it down, so just bear with me.
Yes, sir.
Who is responsible for reporting incidences to the state fires? Is it the individual volunteer department? Who's actually responsible for that?
Yes, they, every fire department is allowed to apply for their fire department ID number.
Okay.
And then that's the number by which they report their fire incidents. Now, in Florida, the legislature didn't want to be too erroneous, so they made Florida as a volunteer reporting state. So it's not mandatory. And that's why with some of our grants that we have, the House and Senate asked us, you know, what would be some good things to help sort of lift that department up if we're going to give them grant money. Like these grants was 100% with no local match for the decon kits. Some of the ones that Susan Shell spoke about is a 25% local match for other more advanced safety equipment. So that's why we require them to become a member of the incident reporting system and go through a safety inspection, not to be erroneous and big oversight or anything like that, but to actually help elevate their capability so it might help toward their insurance services office next time that they get evaluated.
Okay, as a follow-up to that, so if you have, say for instance, Franklin, all of our fire departments are volunteer. If they haven't historically been reporting, how long do they have to be reporting before they can apply for grants?
They
Is there a
have,
time frame?
Susan's gonna know that better. I know they have to do it as part of the agreement, grant
As
agreement.
part of the agreement, they have to maintain for 5 years forward, and we will set them up and get them working immediately.
Okay.
So it winds up going, and this is kind of one of the sort of awkward parts of our job. The House and the Senate pass these grants, the governor signs it into law, and then we come along as the Division of State Fire Marshal, and we say, you have this grant agreement you've got to sign because it has these commitments in it of both parties, right? And it goes to their, you know, local commissioners to sign and to our chief of staff under CFO Petronas. So it's a comprehensive grant agreement, even though it's already been approved by the House and the Senate. So that is one of the things, and that's how we have the long-term commitment in there.
Okay. In our rural area, we have we're a pretty good stretch from one side of this county to another.
Yeah.
We're not very deep,
Right.
but it's pretty wide. Far as training goes, is there any training opportunities in our region, or how close is the local training facility? Or, you know, the closest training facilities for some of these standards that we were spoken of today?
Well, yeah, Susan could probably answer that a little bit better than me. Now, what we do is we have multiple opportunities. The 51 fire academies that Chief Harper spoke about, some of them only do the minimum standards recruit training program, if you will. Others go all the way up to fire inspector, fire officer training. So they're very tiered, and that's one of the reasons we offer every year in September, the middle of September, we offer a volunteer firefighter weekend in Niceville and up here in the Panhandle. And Susan is one of our instructors. Well, there's many instructors, but Susan's always out there and helping departments. So let's put it like this. If you get a coalition together that they all want to have a training program, we'll help them find one of the community colleges or vocational technical centers that will at least either come and provide it or set up a forum for them to be able to get it. Because that's part of our job, is to try to help, you know, provide those opportunities. Even though they don't report directly to us, they're looking for students all the time. So we can try to help, you know, put that sort of matching together.
Okay, but on the minimum, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. So we did ask for some additional funding this year so that we could send folks out to do regional training for volunteer fire departments. So as the director, Chief Harper mentioned, we had the volunteer firefighter weekend last week at the Florida State Fire College in Ocala. We do the one in September. And so hopefully this coming year, we'll be able to get some of our trainers out to some of these regions to provide some of this training as well.
So is it on these weekends that this is happening, the availability? Are they covering if I remember hearing right, there was a minimum requirement for going into structural fires of 12 hours annually? Is that correct? Did I get that wrong?
It's for
Is
for
that-
the
is that
ISO
included?
standard, they have to have minimum 12
Right.
hours a year
Right.
training.
But is that included in that weekend, I guess, that we're speaking about?
Well, that training would be creditable, and they cover, tuition and even sometimes time off if they lose some time from their employment opportunity. And Kyle, you want
Yeah,
to
so
weigh in on that?
the minimum criteria is that in order to, the fire department locally must provide 12 hours of structure fire related training to their members. Now, they're in the training section, we evaluate all of the training that the members receive. So the more structure fire related training that they get, certainly the classes, as they mentioned, the Northwest Florida Volunteer was a great example of one in Niceville. Only because I teach there as well.
That makes all the difference, right?
That's right, yeah. No, they do a great job of getting lots of information, and a lot of these volunteers come in, and we can totally include those hours of training that they receive wherever they go when we do our evaluation. But that minimum 12 must be 12 hours locally in their department, using their equipment
Okay.
in their streets and open areas and things like that.
Okay, I did not understand it, so thanks for that clarification.
And if I can add, so at the volunteer training, oftentimes a lot of that is incorporated into their minimum training standards. They're going out and they're getting their live fire training, evolution, or because it's 192 hours to get your firefighter one. And so they'll get some of that training locally or in other areas, and they'll come up and do some live fire training there to finish up their
So
training
that,
certificate.
that 192 hours, is that for just when you first get certified, or is that? Okay,
Yes.
that's still a long time. I mean, I understand that people are putting their life on the line.
It is.
I do understand that. As a junior in high school, we lost my family home due to a fire. So I completely understand it. I get it. But 192 hours is a lot of hours to ask volunteers, from our standpoint, not yours.
And we understand that. That's just
Yeah.
one of the, the main thing right there is trying to make sure that they stay
Yes.
safe, that they
Yes,
know
ma'am.
what they're doing when they get together and they try to fight a fire, because
Yep.
we don't want to have any more line of duty deaths.
Right.
So one of the things that we've started 3 to 4 years ago was a Grow As You Go program, and this is a module delivery where it's almost a self-paced going through. Charlie Frank, that we mentioned earlier, is our liaison with all the volunteer fire departments in this area. They'll register into the program through him, and he monitors progress. And so, for an example, if I've been in a program and I all of a sudden take a month off or whatever, Charlie will contact the chief, say, hey, Mark's not, doing his training like he should, to keep it up. So it's not that you have to do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, to get all that in. We've really started this program to help with the schedules that are volunteers, because they have their own life, they have their own work schedule and their families. So this has been very productive in helping get that certification. And then he'll schedule times to complete their task books where they're showing their skill proficiencies, and he'll get with other instructors, because it takes 2 instructors to sign off, so they can demonstrate that, and then the live burn requirement as well.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just add, if you have a regional workshop, I'm talking about regional in the county, Mr. Marone can get a hold of me, and I'll make sure staff are there to help moderate. Now, what we have to be careful, and this is why sometimes when we come out like to do a safety visit, because we have some community folks that, are passionate about their concerns, sometimes they want that person to, hey, get these people squared away and make sure they're doing this, this, and this, because, obviously we're trying to be more transparent on what's, what the best practices are. So we have to just be careful, because, I can come in here, we can spar, we can debate, right? I'm good at that. I've been doing this 48 years, but I don't want to send staff over at a regional chiefs meeting and have them get, what somebody said earlier about, we're going to bring the carrot or the stick. I don't know, but anyway, we're trying to make it where this is a goal. You achieve a goal as leaders and policymakers and elected officials, and we work toward that goal. We don't come in here and tell chiefs, oh, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, because then they're not even going to listen to us about the right things to do. So we have to be very careful about that dynamic, so that we're here to help. We want to lift them up, and if they start having like quarterly chiefs meetings or whatever, and we, until you get like a county coordinator or something that you might want to achieve as a goal, we can kind of send somebody over as a proxy for that role to help moderate and everything, as long as it's a very, positive thing. So that's the way we can work together to help you, I believe.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. I do have a couple more
Yes, sir,
questions.
please. By all means.
I know it's inherent in the sentence I'm asking, but I just want to ask it. Do all local governments have the same minimum requirements? In other words, where I'm coming from with that question, is it just a one-size-fits-all approach, or is there just a bare minimum? I'm just clarifying for myself and the
Yeah,
public.
no, I think, one thing that always strikes me when I look at that, let me go back to it. And you look at this slide, okay? Well, just, I'm not I got my master's degree, but it's not an MBA, but I would just say, okay, well, class 5's in the sweet spot. So, okay, and if you take class 4, 5, and 6, it's over half of the agencies. So, but we look at that sort of anomaly there, the class 9 jumps up. And so that's because people that were a grade 10 that start hitting some of those minimums, when ISO comes in and goes, if you would just do this, this, and this, you're just right on the cusp of becoming that higher grade, then that's where I think that that tells us a story there. But everybody's being graded by them the same, I know that. And as far as us go, I mean, as long as it's a city, county, as Chief Gatlin pointed out, the authority having jurisdiction are basically local, local agencies, cities, counties, and fire districts. Now, the Seminole Indian tribe, they're a sovereign nation. They don't have to follow our criteria, but you know what? They do. They do, because they want to be good stewards of their fire department. And they've got hundreds of firefighters and stuff. So some agencies, and there's some, some of the major corporate companies that have a fire brigade, and if they're private, they don't have to follow it either, but a lot of them do, because they want to be good stewards and everything. So, but as far as the minimums, I would say, Kyle, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'll even expand the answer further. The minimum criteria that we apply the schedule to here in Florida is the same in 44 other states. Across the country, it's the exact same minimum criteria. So it really is everybody's starting at the same basis of 12 hours of training, 4 firefighters responding, and the others minimum criteria.
I don't know where, I don't want to ask this question. I don't know where our ISO rating currently is at, but I would like to make you aware, since we're here today having this discussion. So we recently, as a county, had the Regional Planning Council help us do a GIS map for zoning stuff for the county.
Okay.
But one of the things we've talked about with staff of adding that task to the Regional Planning Council, because we've had a couple of fires that either the hydrants weren't clearly marked, or the first people to the scene didn't remember where the closest hydrant was. There was some confusion. So we're talking about adding into that GIS map, where in unincorporated Franklin County, where our hydrants are located. Make sure we're doing it in coordination with our sheriff's department, who's doing the dispatch for all emergency services in the county. So when they make a call, they can say it's, 302 Tallahassee Street, and your closest hydrant is at 320 Tallahassee Street. So they know where to go. I don't know if that would help with our ISO, but that's something we're talking about doing.
So that's a certainly yes is the answer to your question.
Yes.
There's actually, the folks in your county, we grade each fire protection area separately. Most of yours, I think all of yours, have 3 different classes that would apply. We've got a class that applies if a property, residential or commercial, is within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant, and that's usually between a 1 and an 8. And then we have what's called an X rating, which means you're within 5, both of these have to be within 5 road miles of a fire station. But if you're more than 1,000 feet from a fire hydrant, you're a 5X. So the 5 would be the very best, would be good with the protected class, because there's a hydrant within 1,000 feet. The 5X means that you're beyond 1,000 feet from a fire hydrant. And then class 10, meaning you're more than 5 road miles from a fire station. The reason I bring it up is, in order for ISO to appropriately let the insurance company know the correct PPC score for a property, we need to know where those hydrants are. And there is benefits actually in the schedule, in the revaluation as well, to provide more credit if we know where all the hydrants are. And traditionally, that's been one of the hurdles that we all have to jump over is, when I started years ago, we were drawing them on maps, and now we have them in GIS, and things are a little different now. And so, yes, that is a great resource. It can help your residents in your communities, certainly, so that they get the accurate classification, assuming they're within 1,000 feet of those hydrants.
So is the minimum requirement for fire hydrants 1,000 feet? How many feet apart? So if you're.
We don't say that we don't specify anywhere in the schedule
Okay.
that there's a minimum criteria
Okay.
for where hydrants are placed. We just say the schedule says if they're within 1,000 feet, you get this classification. If they're beyond 1,000 feet, you get this. And 1,000 feet is because the
So you
trucks
might not be saying
traditionally
it, but
carry.
you are saying it though. Is the reason I was asking. You know what I'm saying? If you're saying there's not a requirement for it to be, it could be 2,000 feet. Well,
Well-
on the ISO rating, if it's not within 1,000, then it's gonna ding. you.
Right. So for everybody to get the very best class, everyone would have to be within 1,000 feet of a fire
That's what I
hydrant.
was asking. Okay.
And then, Mr. Chair, also
Yes.
too, there's certain commercial buildings that if they were to be built,
Mm-hmm.
you know, from new, would require certain, you know,
Yes.
lengths of water protection, you know, for that particular property, but that would be subject to the permitting process. So, okay, thank you.
I'm gonna go out on a pretty big limb here, but I like to probe things. I'm good with being told no. It's happened a lot in my life. I would like to find out from, and it doesn't have to be answered today, if there's any kind of grant opportunities or anything we can do to help try to, somewhere in this county, establish places like I've seen in some of the bigger counties that actually have the on-site training for going into fires and stuff, so we can start trying to do training in this region. And if there are grant opportunities that can pursue that, I think I'm trying to speak for the board and I shouldn't do that, but I think we'd be interested in trying to approach that.
Okay, good. And that's where I'll get with Mr. Schuler and Mr. Moran. Those infrastructure grants we talked about earlier, that category, that there's usually $10 to $15 million a year. A lot of those are going for, you know, like a fire station that got crushed from Hurricane Michael. But there's also opportunities for training academies in regional areas that, like you said, you got to drive so far, it makes it impractical because you wouldn't have enough personnel left in the county to respond to fires if they got to go 2 or 3 counties away. So that's something that your House and Senate member could assist with, and we'll get with your staff on that.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay. Thank you.
You have something, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more question. A while back, I was interested in locating, you know, those blue reflectors that are always located on the side of a road or in the center line of a road relative to being just across from a fire hydrant. I understood, and maybe my information's wrong, that the Florida Department of Transportation doesn't really have a policy or care about whether one's there or not. Do you know officially if there are fire departments in Florida that are locating those fire hydrants and gluing those reflectors voluntarily across from them?
Yes, a lot of agencies will do that just to help assist their personnel. You know, we went from a, you know, Chief Gatlin and I was thinking about Tallahassee. I'm saying, you know, when we were rookies, we had to just learn where every hydrant was and, you know, every standpipe and sprinkler system and everything. But now, the GPS systems, a lot of fire apparatus, like you said, Commissioner, Mr. Chair, where you mentioned about, you know, GPS tying into some of the 911 databases. Some of them will give you right, you know, to a few feet, but there are some doing that voluntarily. I don't think Chief Gatlin, the DOT or anything requires anything like that. It's not a minimum.
They won't scrape it up if we put one down?
No. There's ways to make sure that it can be, but that would be, Public Works has, you know, the International Water Works criteria and stuff, so that's something you could always explore, because those are helpful at night, especially.
Yeah, right.
And so, thank you. Did you have a follow-up, sir?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair?
I'm good. Any other questions? Well, listen, I really would like to express from this board and from the residents of our county how grateful we are for this opportunity. I was speaking with Mr. Roan a minute ago, and, you know, this is being recorded. So, you know, this is definitely available to any and all of our volunteer fire departments that want to view it. Not all of them are represented here today, but I'm thankful that we have it recorded so it can be viewed, because it's been educational for me. I don't know about everybody else in the room, but it's definitely been an education. To know that at the end of the day, we're all about doing the same thing. Everybody wants to go to work, everybody wants to be able to go back home at night. And that's the bottom line. We all need to feel safe in our own homes. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the job you do on behalf of the residents of the state that sometimes is unseen. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the hospitality. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Meeting adjourned.